That's right. You're listening to and watching the Arsenal Review USA podcast. It is the podcast for the American Gooner who hopefully you have not planned any trips around FA Cup Arsenal fixtures in the near future. I'm Joel. Kyle's here somewhere doing his best to Are You Afraid of the Dark scene setup
Hello.
here. Yeah.
I know I have a bad studio. It'll be much improved once I move here, which
Yeah.
is happening soon, another month.
See, that's commitment for everyone out
Yeah.
there wondering what commitment truly is. You actually plan your moves around a new Arsenal podcast studio, right? That's how.
Yeah, I mean, there won't be a dedicated room, so to speak, but a corner in which I can make kind of the man. It's like a bump out part of addition to a current room that I can make kind of the man computer cave instead of having to commandeer the very plain looking, very dark guest room at the moment. It was, which, I've had, I guess, over time since we've been doing these live shows, but yeah, so many great things to talk about and look forward to with this 2018 season so far.
Well, we'll look forward to all of that new setup you've got going on, especially when there's so much to look forward to with Arsenal. We did get a win. I think we have gotten the win here in the last like 6 games, although there have been like 8 draws in those 6 games. I don't know how that works out, but there seemed like there have been that many draws in just the last few games. There was a win. Okay, Crystal Palace was the one game Arsenal have won in the last couple of weeks here. Obviously, drawing Chelsea and in another big, probably like it's probably been like the second most notable best to worst Arsenal performance of this season, if I could describe it as such. The other best to worst Arsenal performance was, of course, Man U, where they shot like 33 times on goal, only scoring once, of course. And this time they scored twice. I almost said 3 times. This time they scored twice, but then another case of the penalties and more cases of the penalties, as it turns out, against Nottingham Forest in a game that, of course, they lost 4-2. So a lot of talking points in that game, the Nottingham Forest game. I don't know which one you're more excited about talking about, Kyle. Chelsea or Nottingham Forest?
Well, we didn't lose against Chelsea, which is positive. And I guess it kind of just goes to show the very stark difference between starting Arsenal players, or the top 11 Arsenal players, and backup Arsenal players. I think one of the points I wanted to make tonight and on this particular podcast, and this kind of brings a perfect opportunity to do so, is that I think out of any of I don't think I know, from having watched many teams and plenty of Premier League games and plenty of other football in and around, Europe, with, backup players coming in for, the cities of the world, or the Uniteds, or Tottenham even, or, players, Liverpool, you name it. I mean, if they're going to be challenging for a top half of the table spot in the Premier League, typically most of these teams have, at least 5 or 6 players that maybe don't see the first team, regularly, but contribute at a high level throughout the season, or can come into an FA Cup game and really perform well. And there is a huge difference between Arsenal's starting 11 talent and the sort of talent or available players that they had at their disposal against the Nottingham Forest. And granted, there was some experience in the lineup. You did have Welbeck, you did have Mertesacker, you did have Walcott. But the fact of the matter is that, Walcott is a player that's been at Arsenal for 13 years now. When did he come over? 2006. So 11 years. Basically
like longer, but yeah,
17 or 18 years. And I know that someone can argue that he's actually gotten better during his time at Arsenal. If anything, he's probably getting to the point where he's slower. That he's the slowest he's ever been, and his touch is the worst that's ever been, given his performance against Nottingham Forest. And granted, these players don't play as much as the first teamers, so they can be out of form and they're going to be a little bit rusty. But I don't really buy that argument when you say, "Oh, so and so hasn't played for X amount of weeks, or so-and-so hasn't done this." They're in training every day. They're professional footballers. It's not like you forget how to
Right.
to play the game.
It's
Sure,
not. It's not like us playing indoor, where you maybe haven't walked at all since the last game. A little bit.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, when I go an entire week or two between full field outdoor games over the summer or in the fall when I'm playing in my men's league and I don't work out at all in between games, yeah, I'm going to lose a step or two, or I'm going to be sucking wind after my first run down the pitch. But you have to remember that these guys' job to be professional footballers, and sure, you're going to have a bad touch here and there. You're going to have a little bit of rust to shake off if you're coming off a long-term injury or something like that. But all of these players that faced Nottingham Forest the other day, have played this year. Some of them, probably double-digit matches at this point in some cases, at least in sub appearances. And I know I jumped from the Chelsea result into complaining about the lack of, the huge gap between good players and bad.
It really is. That's the sadness of it, and that might be more of an indication of the quality of the manager when you're comparing a Chelsea game which had a lot of starters to a Nottingham Forest game which had not that many starters, and it was against a team that were they like one win the last 8 or something.
Yeah, they had
no result. It was actually worse in that game than the Chelsea game.
Yeah. Well, and I guess back to the original point where I didn't have a chance to get across yet is, Arsenal played really well against Chelsea, I thought. Chelsea could have obviously won the game. Arsenal should have won the game. I know people like Cesc Fabregas came out in the news when he was being interviewed afterwards that, Chelsea should have won the game. And in some cases that's probably true because, Petr Cech played fantastic. So did Courtois. The goalkeepers from both sides played really well and they kept their teams in it. But if you look at the amount of chances that Arsenal created, players like Lacazette, every time he touched the ball in the box, he was dangerous. And I think he's the type of guy going forward. I'm really excited to see him, in an Arsenal shirt going forward, assuming that he can get assists.
Does it not satisfy you that he's only dangerous most of the time? I know I'm maybe glossing over the fact that he's scored a fair amount of goals for Arsenal, but he does start to worry me that he's the guy who's like always looking dangerous, but maybe will never. It's hard to say he'll never at this point, but it looks like maybe not soon. Will he be someone who's actually looking dangerous and scoring?
Yeah, scoring.
I've seen that with a lot of other.
Yeah,
I've seen that with a lot of other players. It's like, oh man, they're looking so good, and you get the feeling like they go away from the game. All these players like to score goals, but they go away from the game. They're like, yeah, I didn't score goals, but I looked pretty dangerous. I felt pretty dangerous tonight. That's enough for me.
Well,
I feel like a lot of those players have been in Arsenal.
There was a player back in the day for Arsenal that looked pretty dangerous. Yes, Francis Jeffers also, but named Gervinho. Gervinho had some speed and oftentimes looked dangerous in and around the box and would miss like 2-footers. However, I think Lacazette is maybe a touch more talented than Gervinho is. And
you heard it here first, folks.
Yes, granted, it's been a half season, and I agree with you to the point that we've seen his finishing ability in some games. We've seen even offside calls against him that shouldn't have been. But yeah, I would agree with the Chelsea scenario that he had plenty of chances, and Courtois made some fantastic saves that he probably would have saved against any striker in that scenario. But also, Lacazette probably needs to finish a little bit better, especially in a big game like that. But
it wasn't Morata. It wasn't Morata finishing, thankfully.
Yes.
For him. Thankfully, Morata was turning into Morata finishing.
I mean, I think with the exception of Alexis, Lacazette, Giroud as well, but he can't quite wiggle away quite like Lacazette, or do that quick turn and snap fire that you see from Lacazette with both feet so far this season. I think with the exception of Alexis, Lacazette has the potential for being a huge scoring threat, at a high percentage when he gets the ball in dangerous areas in the box. So give him a little bit of time, and he might have to be that or have more opportunities to be that if Alexis leaves here in a couple of weeks or a matter of days. Who knows if the rumors are true or not. But the point being, again, back to the Chelsea Forest results and comparing the two, Arsenal were I thought the best team on the day. Obviously a few mistakes. I thought the penalty again is an indictment on the FA and the referees within the Premier League.
I don't know. I thought it was pretty hard to tell even after. I mean, on the replays, clearly it got some like extra spin, but it wasn't one of those that was like it was more just like simultaneous contact.
I think that
1-2 contact.
No, I agree with that, but I think that referees, and this is where the instant replay comes into play as well, and assisting the referees in making these decisions, is that you have to look at how the alleged fouled player is reacting. I mean, it's Eden Hazard. He's a diver by trade.
Are we talking about the dive or the double hit? I thought you were talking about the double hits.
No, I was talking about Chelsea.
Sorry.
I mean, the double hit too. Oh, there's so many penalties lately. It's hard to focus on which one.
I got ahead of myself. I don't know. Okay, go ahead. Say what you said about Chelsea.
I was going to say that, well, previously, Joel, I had said Arsenal were the best team on the day. That obviously is not true against Forest. So it has to be the fact that I'm talking about. I know you've been eating Mike and Ike, so maybe the sugar is clouding your clouding your judgment. But just staying on the Chelsea game for a moment, you have an Arsenal squad, again, with their starting 11 players that were the best team on the day. And there were scenarios in which, of course, we already mentioned that Arsenal could have scored and won the game. Chelsea could have also scored and won the game. But you did have another scenario that I think is a huge indictment towards the FA and the referees, and not using instant replay and making into account the way that the player like Eden Hazard is reacting. I mean, he acted like it. He went down like he had been hit in the backs with an axe, or hit in the back. I think I said backs. Hit in the back with an axe, where really it was just a simple, both legs, the offensive player in Hazard's case, and then Bellerin, the defensive player, both feet going, straight out for it. And there's a little bit of contact, but
afterwards that it was one of those simultaneous hits, which it looked like he got none of the. It didn't. It looked like it was technically a foul. Huge embellishment by Hazard. I don't know if you saw it, but they actually got interviewed together, which is, I'm all for this precedent. Like, they should always do that. If two people fight, two players fight, or one guy, fouls
by an English network or by NBC?
I think it was not NBC. It was it must have been Sky. But afterwards they're interviewed at this Bellerin and Hazard, and Bellerin, I'm paraphrasing massively. Bellerin said, basically, we hit him at the same time. Didn't think it was a penalty, more or less. And then Hazard was like, yeah, no question, it was a penalty. But it was right. But it was an interesting scenario. I would have liked it had they asked him more questions about, like, what one guy thought about the others, how he acquitted himself in that scenario, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I've just never seen that where they actually two players involved in a controversial play get interviewed in the same interview, like, together.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to accomplish with that. Even if Bellerin says, "Oh no, I didn't think it was a penalty," and Hazard say, "Oh, it definitely wasn't." Like Bellerin's, that's
like Jerry Springer style.
That's a great point. It was definitely a penalty.
Yeah.
Like, what are they going to convince him of?
Yeah.
But we've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast. Others have as well. People have blogged about it for decades. Maybe not decades, but maybe for the past decade. That Arsenal and just wildly inconsistent, but almost entirely based on the personnel that they have on the pitch. You kind of know exactly what you're going to get out of the starting 11. They've definitely thrown some stinkers up there. Even with Ozil and Alexis and so on the pitch. But, I think we talked about it at the end of last season. Was the Bayern fixtures last season, or was that the year before?
I want to say they were last season. We had a couple years in a row. So
yeah, and I think maybe it was spring of last. It was spring. I think it was spring of last year.
Yeah,
when we kind of brought that up.
It always is.
Yeah,
that's the tradition.
We had
opening and Arsenal losing to Bayern Munich.
We had the same conversation that in the spring that the Bayern situation was the first time that Arsenal had been embarrassed in a number of years. I mean, they had lost 6-0 to Chelsea. They had lost 6 to 1 against City. They were losing rather often by a large number of goals to the better sides in the Premier League, and they were being embarrassed. It wasn't the exception; it was the rule a lot of times.
Yeah.
When a top 4 tie or whatever it may have been, and it had been a season or two since something like that had happened to them against one of the bigger sides in England. It just so happened last season that Bayern embarrassed them in the Champions League, and so I don't expect that sort of thing to happen anymore with the starting 11 and the typical starting 11 that you see within Arsenal when everyone's healthy. But unfortunately, we're kind of back into that situation now at Arsenal that basically if the best 11 players at Arsenal are not healthy and ready to go, you have absolutely no idea what you're going to get. And in the case of Forest, now moving to this debacle in the FA Cup, you are in a scenario where plenty of first team experience, I guess you could say, but also plenty of, first team players or reserve players getting a sniff, in a competition in which we're the holders, and we have never been knocked out of the FA Cup in the 3rd round until, of course, what has just happened in Wenger's tenure. So, again, a lineup of inconsistency and players that, have hit another negative milestone in Arsene Wenger's tenure, and then has now started this spiral and this conversation around, has the legacy been tarnished further? Where does Arsene Wenger go from here? Because I know many, not fans, but those that have appreciated what he's done for the club, especially considering the FA Cup victory from last year, kind of said, okay, well, he probably should have gone out after last year's FA Cup, to really go out on a high, but there's very little that he could probably do to tarnish his legacy after the fact that he's won 3 FA Cups in the last 4 years. But a result like this, he's on thin ice in terms of a legacy, I think, over the rest of this season, for sure.
I would posit that maybe it's you and I both agree that he's definitely tarnishing his legacy, and just objectively speaking, in terms of the bad results that he gets. But to Arsenal fans, is he really tarnishing his legacy? Is what he's doing now any worse than what's been going on for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years? Is it that much worse that you say, "Oh yeah, he's tarnishing his legacy"? He's been getting the same kind of results in these games for several years. I don't know. I think my point is we're also numb to the habit Arsene Wenger and Arsenal have of just blowing leads, never really amounting to much in terms of a title challenge. That, I don't know, this is more the norm than it is an exception to the norm or exception to the rule, and that means that it's I don't know. It's not tarnishing to me anymore. I know what you mean, and I think a lot of people know what you mean and probably would agree with you. But everyone out there, do you agree with what I'm saying? We're so numb to it. I don't even think of it oh man, it's gotten worse for Arsene Wenger. This is just more the same to me. I know it's just a state of mind, and that's not really doesn't really speak to the fact that yes, his results are terrible. A result like this is terrible, but I don't know. I don't know. It's just I feel like based on that criterion, he's been tarnishing his legacy for the last 10 years. Yeah.
No, I think I see where you're coming from. This idea that he never criticized his players, and that's true, and I guess he kind of criticized players after this particular result, but that really it's on him. I think there were other players within the squad that were healthy enough and fresh enough to have been.
Well, now the players are so weak need that they just criticize themselves after the game. If you watch the Per Mertesacker interview, where he's like, "Yeah, a lot of us had the last chance to to prove to the boss that we have what it takes, even though we're older players, but that chance has come and gone." It's like broadcast carrier there.
But I feel like it's a little bit disingenuous coming from Per Mertesacker. He seems like a great leader, great presence in the locker room, but he's being groomed to become a coach somewhere in the Arsenal, hierarchy. He knows that he's not a first team quality or talent anymore. And he knows that a lot of the players that were on the pitch the other night are not first team quality. And he can throw himself under the bus because he has a job waiting for him in the Arsenal administrative or coaching staff or coaching ranks come retirement at the end of the season. So, I mean, for him to do that to the other players that are still trying to make a name for themselves, I think is a little bit unfair. But I think to your point, Joel, is that you look at the sorts of players that Arsenal have, are signing. We have Alexis, and he might be out the door, but he's the one player, with the exception of maybe Mertesacker when he was, in his prime, the first couple seasons he was with us, that got upset about everything that was negative, but like in a healthy way. The through ball wasn't good enough, or the pass, or someone didn't give it to him on an open run, or teammates are not getting open, obviously losing the game, or just even drawing, giving a last second equalizer up to the other team. And another topic, I guess, around Arsenal that is just constantly talked about, but I think is worth bringing up, is just the players that were on, even the first team players that having watched the game, because I know Petr Cech was tweeting with some people about the fact that he was watching the match on TV. I don't think he didn't even make the trip. A lot of these players were sitting in their homes watching this game. Where's the passion? Where's the anger? Where's the flat out frustration? And it's always like, oh, we're going to learn from this and we're going to get better. And there's always next time and chin up type reactions from these players on Twitter. And maybe that's how they're being instructed by Arsenal communication staff and by Arsene Wenger to respond to these things. But I would just love a chance to go back in time and give Twitter to Patrick Vieira and Thierry Henry and, Robert Pires and Freddie Ljungberg and Ray Parlour and Lee Dixon and all these guys, during the heyday of Arsenal, and get their thoughts after a tough loss or, a draw that, they got screwed in the end. I mean, I would have loved, especially a Patrick Vieira, give me his Twitter account in 2001, or whatever. I think the sentiment around these sorts of results, the sentiment around the way the team is playing, the sorts of, excuses that they're making would be vastly different with the sorts of players of Arsenal old than you see today. And I think that's probably Premier League wide, but it's the way Wenger, as you said, has approached, his criticism around, when things go poorly. And it just never has been about whether the way the players actually perform or approach a match. It's always been something external or something else that's affected them negatively, or they've been unlucky somehow. And
right.
I just think at this point, as fans, as commentators on the game, however you want to take it, there has to be an onus on, the managerial setup for one, and we've been talking about it for a long time, but also the players. I know I'm sick and tired of seeing, I don't care what age they are. I don't care if they need more experience. Everyone at Arsenal, regardless of where you are on the totem pole, you're getting paid well, each week to play football. And, I'm sorry, if you're not good enough, then, we need to get rid of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not going to happen. No one's going to get gotten rid of at Arsenal unless they want to get gotten rid of.
It's not a thing.
Like Alexis or Ozil, and we'll see how that pans out. We did get a new guy. We did get, however you say his last name, Mavropanos. That sounds Greek enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mavropanos.
Castanos. Yeah, Mavropanos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So who knows? We might see him in action. I don't know. He just trained with He just trained with the team at London Colney, and maybe we'll see him against Chelsea in the Carabao Cup coming up here. Do you have a prediction for the Carabao Cup? Since this is another, it's just a crazy run of fixtures here. We got another game against Chelsea, and it's in a non-Premiership game. I mean, I guess we should go back last week. We did have a Chelsea. Yeah, to win over Chelsea 2-1. That was my prediction. You had a 1-1, so you get points for that. And against Forest, we both had 3-1 wins, which, didn't pan out. So do we have any patron predictions?
We did. I don't have them in front of me, but the standings on ArsenalReviewUSA.com are up to date. Laird had a 4-pointer as well as Edgar, both of the patrons that are participating in this particular no prize, no
On what?
real impact.
No prize. We're not giving out prizes. I thought we were.
Well, we give a prize out for the Sunday League.
Oh, okay.
Anyhow, it's up to date. We're still way behind. Laird has like a 20-point lead or close to it, based on his. He predicted a 2-2 for Chelsea. That's all I can really remember at this point. Excuse me. But yes, another crazy run of fixtures here as we finish out January. We play Chelsea Wednesday, away at Bournemouth on Sunday.
Right.
Back at the Emirates against Crystal Palace again in the league. So, we start the round 2 with a lot of these teams on Saturday the 20th, and then back leg number 2 back at home against Chelsea on the 24th. And then actually almost a full week off a Tuesday match, end of the month against Swansea.
Okay. All right. So what do you think predictions wise?
For Chelsea away, I think we'll lose 2-1.
I think we'll win 2-1.
Ooh.
And then against
Bournemouth.
Then against Bournemouth, that's also at Bournemouth. I think we will tie 2-2 there.
Wow. We will win 2-1.
2-1, says Kyle. 2-1. All right. Some crazy. I should notate these. We said loss. You said loss for Chelsea. I said win.
Yes.
And win against Bournemouth. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff from Arsenal. I mean, it's not. Where do you go from here? You've heard all this stuff before. You've heard Per Mertesacker saying that players aren't good enough. He's usually the one who comes out and is like the figurehead or the talking head for the rest of the team, and it's supposed to be this big reaction from them. They're going to learn from this, blah 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 blah. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if they haven't learned from this like identical result over the last 5 years, I don't know what they could possibly learn from this. It was definitely disheartening to see Arsenal, like we said, play so badly against a team that has been playing so badly in the Championship. So.
Yeah.
It goes back to your point. That's the one worrying thing about Arsenal, not to pile on the negativity, but what the hey. That's the one worrying thing about Arsenal is that they seem to have, outside of that starting 11 that seems, fairly good, so few. So it really is just 11 or 12 or 13 players. Maybe like 15 players that can get it done for Arsenal. Outside of that, it just drops off very, very quickly. I don't know what young player right now I would trust in the squad to actually, pull a game around. I mean, they certainly didn't do it against Forest, which is the team that can be gotten to. So I don't know what, it seems like there's a bit of a fall off. In the young players for Arsenal in the last 3 or 4 years, where I can't really say I'd want to pick any one of them, especially not on defense.
Yeah, I mean, what
in any of these upcoming games, but Carabao Cup, you're probably gonna see all of them. So
okay, well, young player aside, what senior player that doesn't start regularly would you want to see? Do you have any
Ramsey against Chelsea? Ramsey against Chelsea. That's saying a lot. You know how I like Aaron Ramsey or don't like Aaron Ramsey.
But he usually starts. What I was going to say is that doesn't start all that often. I mean, maybe with the exception of Giroud,
Giroud would be the only one. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, Giroud.
Theo Walcott, no. I mean, Danny Welbeck.
What's happening? Walcott. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I think it, everyone out there, and these sorts of comments aren't like envy or, jealousy around the sorts of livings that these professional athletes make. I just think that more should be expected of a player like Theo Walcott, who, from what I understand, is I think in the top 5 paid players at Arsenal. Yeah. And I think he's biding his time. That he's doesn't seem to be any attempt from him to work his way into a transfer,
Yeah.
to another club where he wants to play more. Because, I mean, we talked about this with a lot of backup players or players that, it doesn't appear that they have any sort of desire to get into the first team or better themselves in their career in terms of like their playing aspirations, because Arsenal pays them so well to sit on the bench
Yeah.
and suck it up in
I
the
mean,
sort of Nottingham Forest role,
To be clear, yeah, to be clear, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this topic because I think we've covered it several times on this podcast. But to be clear, all that blame is squarely on Arsenal's shoulders. They have to introduce that kind of accountability and that kind of competition into Arsenal and Arsene Wenger into the team themselves. Of course, yeah, guys in their 20s who are getting paid, like 60 grand, 70, 80, 90, 100 grand a year or a week. And there's no incentive for them to perform well. Of course, they're gonna rest on their laurels naturally. I think you find, I don't want to say very few, but you'd find, well, maybe very few guys in that age bracket who, after they realize that is accepted, would not in some way get a little more comfortable in that kind of working environment. I mean, just think of people at cushy office jobs. Obviously, they're not professional athletes who are like pushing their body to the limit, but they put in a certain effort or level of effort to get there, and then they realize the resistance to the salary or whatever they have is very little. There's no checks and balances, and they start taking time off, start working from home 5 days a week, and it's something that a lot of people
try to work from home every now and then.
Well, Petr Cech did apparently.
Yeah, it's true.
Game.
I
think he may have in a couple of the recent games too. He's had some good games, but he's also had some bad games too.
So yeah. I'll ask you this question, and then we can wrap it up. We do have some contest winners, and we've rambled on long enough. But given the Forest result and the lineup that was presented beforehand, what would you give for players like Gabriel Paulista, Lucas Perez, those sorts of backup players, but pretty darn good for what you get out of them, I think. What would you give for some of those players back at Arsenal? Because, I mean, we gave up on those players pretty quick, or at least Arsene Wenger did. But some of these other, bit part players that are making good money, or other players in the lineup, or some of these youth players who've been around forever and have yet to establish themselves as regular first-team starters. We're selling the Lucas Perez's of the world, but we keep around some of these others. I mean, what would you get for those sorts of players back in the Arsenal lineup?
Did we sell Lucas Perez? I thought we put him out on loan. No.
Well, I mean, he may be out on loan. I mean, we definitely sell Paulista, but yeah, Perez might be out on loan, but for all intents and purposes, he's out of favor with Arsene Wenger after one season. And to me, it seemed like, and there were never big articles about it, he seemed like he was having a pretty good attitude with the fact that, basically whenever he played, he scored or or provided an assist, yet he was banished back to the bench every single time.
To your point, he was pretty integral in the FA Cup last year, because he had a couple good assists, maybe a couple good goals in some of those like rainy, cold nights,
right?
Up in the north type FA Cup games, and so it would be nice to have a player like that who can turn games around on the bench. But I mean, it's kind of like are we crying over spilt milk? With these kind of things with Arsenal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, hopefully they don't do that again next year. But then again, they probably will. So, I don't know where that leaves us in terms of this particular podcast discussion, Kyle.
Arsenal were flying high for however many matches it was, undefeated, setting records at the Emirates, and 13 wins in a row, and then beat Spurs for the first time handily, in a number of seasons now. And then you get into December, and we stop scoring goals, and we're giving up a lot of penalties, and all of a sudden 2018 hits, and here we are, knocked out of the FA Cup for the first time in the third round, under Arsene Wenger's tenure. And it just seems like it's gone pear-shaped rather quickly. And, again, we don't want to be overly negative, but, when you're doing a production like this, when you talk about a team every single week, and you're coming
It's-
off something fairly negative.
I was gonna say, when you describe objectively describe a 4-2 loss to a crappy championship side.
A championship side who hadn't won in 5 games and hadn't scored in 3. Let's keep in mind, Nottingham Forest had failed to score in 3 straight games leading up to this match, and they scored 4.
Yeah.
So there you go. But that said, let's go on to something maybe slightly less negative, but also kind of funny at the same time. So I think it's funny because I didn't even realize this. So we were talking about last podcast that, the penalty that we gave up late to West Brom, which was a shambolic decision for one by Mike Dean. But anyhow, they hadn't been awarded a penalty in quite some time by, at home. But also it felt like to me, and I was not paying attention, that it felt like it had been a while since Arsenal had given up a penalty defensively. Man, was I wrong, because we had all sorts of answers come in. One actually only being the correct one because there were so many to choose from, apparently. So we gave up a penalty against Man City in November. We gave up a penalty and lost 1-0 to Cologne in the Champions League, or the Europa League, excuse me. We also gave up a penalty to Watford as well in October. And obviously we've given up a lot of penalties since I asked this question, 3 to be exact. So the answer is, before the West Brom game, the most recent penalty that Arsenal had conceded was against Cologne to lose 1-0 in the Europa League. So congrats to Doug, and then also another random. That was the only correct answer, was from Doug. And then TJ is the other winner of the T-shirt courtesy of Roughneck Scarves, or excuse me, HuariDesigns.com, and the scarf courtesy of RoughneckScarves.com. So Doug and TJ, thanks for submitting, and everyone else that submitted to the contest, thank you for that. But hopefully, as we move forward here, Arsenal don't concede all that many more penalties in some of these key fixtures. And let me ask you this, Joel. I mean, there's some big games against Chelsea in the Carabao Cup coming up. What does, if Arsenal were to get past them and actually go on and win this thing, the only trophy that Arsene Wenger has never won at Arsenal, with the exception of the Champions League, and the only domestic trophy that Arsenal has not won under Arsene Wenger. What does that do? Not for a legacy standpoint, well, what does that do for Arsenal's season? Let's make the assumption that Arsenal somehow finish in the top 4, maybe they make it to a semifinal or even a final in the Europa League. But what does a League Cup do to people's outlook on the season, if anything?
Nothing. It does absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Is that too easy to answer?
No, that's fair. I mean,
no, I don't think it does anything. I don't think it does absolutely, especially when it's called the Carabao Cup. I guess you could call it the League Cup to make yourself feel better, but it is the crappy Carabao Cup. Now, having said that, we do play Chelsea in the semifinal. So, I mean, I guess you could look at the run of results or wins and say that we beat some good teams, and that's kind of an accomplishment. But I don't think the League Cup is anything that any Arsenal fan would get excited about, considering we actually have been doing decent in cup competitions in the last couple of years. We've won, the FA Cup 3 years out of the last 4. Right? Yeah, 14, 15.
Well,
17. Yeah.
Let's put it this way: for those that live in the UK, or have the ability to go to some of these matches or these cup finals, we won't be going to Wembley for the FA Cup this season, but perhaps a day out at Wembley for everyone.
Right.
There in the UK for the League Cup final. Something that I would love to do someday: watch Arsenal at Wembley in a final, whatever it may be. But all that said, back to the competition stuff. I don't have anything for you. I think we've kind of rambled on long enough in terms of the negativity surrounding the club. We will kick off this new year, or continue with this new year of more free stuff. But we do appreciate everyone hanging in there with us and still submitting answers to the contests and all that sort of stuff. And we'll get something else up online. In the next couple of days in terms of this week as we prep for the rest of this month.
Yeah, if nothing else, like you said, Kyle, before recording, that there are plenty of, probably will be plenty of opportunities to get Arsenal tickets throughout the rest of the season. At least like snag some more free seats on the ticket exchange for upcoming Arsenal games
Yeah.
if you're looking to travel to a game sometime
Oh,
soon, which I know we maybe are, hopefully.
yeah. Hopefully,
But
gonna make it over in April.
yeah, it's gonna be harder to do it the twofers, when we're bowing out of these competitions left and right. But maybe we'll get like 2 Premiership games or a Carabao Cup game in there.
Well, it
Well,
wouldn't be a
maybe not Carabao
Carabao
Cup.
Cup. It'd be a
Maybe not Wembley. So
yeah,
yeah.
and that would be the end of February anyway.
Oh, you never know. You never know. We might snag some Wembley tickets.
Europa League, Europa League
home of
semifinal.
home of Tottenham Hotspur. So wouldn't that be nice? But okay, yeah,
Right.
we have rambled on long enough on this podcast. Thanks for hanging with us. Thanks for hanging with and sticking by Arsenal. We're going to get in touch with you on the other side of the next game on the other side of the next 2 games on the next podcast. That'll be after the Chelsea game and the Bournemouth game. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Until then, as always, remember, support the Arsenal and have a good week.